town one today, so there will be no office hours today, but I've been meeting many of you privately, scheduling appointments. I'm happy to do that still, and there'll be office hours next week, which is the last week of class, and I'll be around the following week as well. So I'm really enjoying conversations with so many of you. It's actually a really great pleasure. Are there any questions on the material so far? Last time we discussed some very important ways that the social can become biological by affecting our genes, especially which gene variants we have acquired over long stretches of time, how their expression depends on our environment, and how the environment modifies their expression through some kind of epigenetic control. And I mean, as I hope you've seen already over the last few weeks, what we've been talking about is the way in which the social and the biological are in conversation at the collective level and at individual levels. And last week we got a sort of sense of a very deep and fundamental way in which the social can influence the biological. Today we're going to be talking about something different, but before I do that, I just want to review some items related to the final exam. This is our current thinking about what we're going to do. Some of these details may change. By this coming Tuesday, we will have all the final instructions on the course website. So whatever's on the course website is the final and important information. So the exam is, and then you saw last year's exam or 2 years ago exam, some example of this exam was sent to everyone in the class. And all past year's finals exams going back like 8 or 10 years are available online on the course website. So take-home exam. It's an open book, open note exam. No extra reading is required or expected, although it's very common for us to give you something short to read for one of the questions. We'll say, like, read this news article and answer a question about it. It would be typical. But other than that, you're not expected to do any original research for the exam, and you won't get any extra credit for it if you do. You're free to do so if you want to educate yourself about something, but it's not required in the slightest. You must work on your own. So no collaboration with others is allowed. Period. Don't collaborate with anyone on any answer to the exam. Don't copy materials from some joint source. Don't all contribute to a wiki and then all download from the wiki. This will all be detected with software that we use, and you'll get in trouble. It will be embarrassing for all of us. Just don't do that. Do not plagiarize from others or from any other sources. Okay? So the thing that regularly gets kids in trouble is not so much the plagiarism, although that's bad, the copying from other sources, but rather the failure to footnote. So if you take a whole paragraph from someone else, if you put quotation marks in a citation, you cannot get in trouble, right? You might get a slightly worse grade, or someone might think, oh, they just copied this whole thing. The thing that gets people in trouble is failure to cite. And you all should know this, you just cite. Even if you get it from a collective notes. Let's say, for example, you encounter some study notes from another class on obesity and public health. And they're a really nice summary of public health issues related to obesity. And you think, oh, I can use these sentences in this paragraph. And nobody will know because it's just some study notes from something else. Well, some other student may use the same study notes. And then you'll be caught for this. And it's just so stupid. Just put in quotations. Study notes from 2 years ago, Smith class or something. Okay, then you can't get in trouble. So just save yourselves a lot of headaches. Please do not run afoul of these things. If you panic and you think your life is ending because you can't do this or whatever, call your professors, including me, or your TFs, okay? It's typically students make stupid decisions in moments of severe stress and panic. Don't let yourself fall for that, okay? There are other paths forward rather than copying answers from someone else. The exam, unlike the previous midterms, will be broadly synthetic of the entire course. I'm going to deliberately try to generate questions that require you to link 3 or 4 lectures or themes that go across the whole class, okay? So it's not going to be like focused on some narrow topic. There's probably going to be about 14 to 16 pages of writing. This is double-spaced across 2 questions. So probably the format will be like the sample you were sent. These 2 questions, pick one. Then the next 2 questions, pick one of the 2. And maybe a bonus question that you can use to replace some of the others. And you'll just have to answer 2 questions, each question about 7.5 pages of writing. And the questions then will be blindly graded by your TFs. The exams will be disassembled. We have 4 days to grade these exams from when they're due, so it's a big operation for us. They'll be disassembled, blindly graded, reassembled, and then after they're reassembled, your course TF will also look at your exam and make sure that it makes sense, there's nothing wrong, you didn't goof in some way. If the 2 questions have a very different grade, we're going to see, well, they're both fairly graded. Then they'll all come to me. I will review them, and then your final grades will go into the spreadsheet for the class. If for some reason, though, these exams will have very few notes on them, because we have hundreds of exams to read, we'll have 240 questions to read in 4 days, and each of these questions is 7 words, so we'll have like 1,000, more than 1,500 pages to read in 4 days, so there'll be very skimpy annotations. But if for some reason you want your exam, please give a self-addressed stamped envelope with your address to my secretary, Kim Kuzina, okay? To hand deliver it to her in my office. We're going to probably post the exam, almost certainly we will do this, at 5 p.m. on Thursday, April 24th. That's the last day of this class. So it will be posted on the course website as a PDF on that day. And you must upload your exam onto the course website by the end of May 4th, that's Sunday, by 5 p.m. However, and we will not accept late exams. I'm sorry, so let me be clear. The hard copy, that's bullet point 2, must be delivered to the lobby of Hill House 17 between 12 and 2 o'clock on Sunday, May 4th. Okay? I didn't stop to think, are there exams on that day? I don't think there are exams on that day. There are exams on that day. So I'm glad I asked. So we're going to have to fix that. I don't know if Sam is here. Is Sam here? Yeah, so we're going to have to check the timing when the exams are due. But we'll resolve it. So either that Sunday or that evening or sometime that day, we're going to set up a booth and you have to deliver a hand copy. This is to prevent us from having to print hundreds of exams in different formats. So everyone must deliver a hand copy. Or your roommate can deliver it for you if you wish. You don't have to personally deliver it. But it will need to be delivered in the time window that we specified, which we will let you know what that is. On that Sunday, there'll be a time window. And then in addition, we will allow you more time after that to upload the electronic copy. So let's say the exam will be due no later than 5 o'clock on that day, or 2 o'clock, or whatever we pick. Then there'll be like a few more hours afterwards to go back to your room and upload the electronic copy. But here's a very, very important point. You will not get credit if you just upload the electronic copy. Period. So nobody should come afterwards and say, I didn't hand in the paper copy, but I did upload the electronic copy by the deadline. Okay? You must turn in the paper copy. You'll be checked off the logbook, and the exams will be disassembled for us through the process. So you can return the exam early if you want to. If you don't have to return it on the 4th. And if you need to do that, please email Sam Southgate about that. If you're leaving town or some other exigency where you can't return the exam on the 4th. We'll accommodate that if you need to return it early. And there are going to be very specific directions that need to be followed that facilitate our grading. We'll do this blindly grading. So there'll be a face sheet like on the previous exams with very, very specific instructions. You have to staple the exams separately. So there'll be 2 separate questions. Each has to be stapled separately. There's a face page, there's a paper clip, all this crap. It's really important for us because we have just a few days to grade all these exams. So that sounds all very stressful and nerdy and neurotic of me, but trust me, it's really necessary for us to do you a good job, treat you fairly, to have these rules followed. Any questions about these mechanics? Yeah?
Just based on what I'm looking at, if the exam is due hard copy before the electronic copy?
No, other way around. So I had written here, but I'm going to change this time because I just thought, so I wanted you to turn the hard copy in by between 12 and 2 o'clock on May 4th. We're going to set up a little booth there to receive it. And then you have until 5 p.m. on that same day to upload the electronic. You could do the other way around. If you want to upload the electronic and deliver it, that's fine with us.
Okay, but just clarification, if we turned in that hard copy at noon, we would not be able to make any more edits.
Correct, yes. They must be the same. That's right. Your graders will grade the hard copies. We use the electronic copies for plagiarism detection. And also some graders prefer to read it on paper copy. I only look at paper copies, so in the end, everything will be printed in paper and then delivered to me to examine. Yeah?
Professor, then what's the worth of having separate times?
Because we give you guys a little extra time. People always panic, like you're scrambling to get the print copy by the deadline, and then we've had all kinds of, I've taught this course for many years, I've had so the kid is going to be trying to upload it, they can't get it uploaded, their computer's not working, and they can't upload it, and then they're missing the deadline to turn. The paper copy is the most important thing. And then we'll have a little spreadsheet, we'll check it off. Then you go back to, you can do it the other way around if you want, or presumably, guys, you should not be at this stage of your lives working until the last minute, right? I mean, that's amateur. Really, I mean, you should be able to manage your time. And also, that's really stupid, frankly. Like, unless you just can't help it, you have 2 exams due on the same day or whatever, you should be managing your time so you're not typing at 11 o'clock on Sunday, right? In principle, most of you should be able to leisurely upload this on Saturday, and then print a copy, and then, hand it to your roommate who brings it in, and you just have a cup of coffee or something. Okay? You should aspire to that. Yeah?
Can I ask a question about why the decision to obtain classes?
In class. I've been all around on this. That's a very fair and good question. Okay. We'd like to vary the evaluation modalities. So some of you probably found the midterm stressful and annoying. It's just an hour and 15 minutes. It felt like we were regurgitating. It's just like little simple facts. This is an opportunity to show off in a different way, right? You have 10 days to write this, 7.5 pages. We're not expecting you to read anything outside it. You can really integrate the material in the course. And some of you will find this an easier way to shine than the midterms. First reason. So we like to have heterogeneous ways of doing it. The second reason we do it is that it is extremely difficult to grade handwritten exams in 4 days. Think about it from our perspective. So, and the class now only has 120 kids, but it used to have 400 kids and maybe it will again at Yale, I don't know. But maybe it'll depend on what you guys tell your friends. But we have to prepare for the possibility that we will have 200 or 300 exams that need to be graded in 4 days, because we have to finish the grading by May the 8th. And we're not allowed by the registrar at Yale to require the exam be due any sooner than 3 days into the final period. And it can't be due during the reading period. So we have a very, very tight window. And it's easier to grade typewritten exams. So that's another reason we do rotate. Yeah?
Just is the final time 12 to 2 on Sunday? Is that like the final time?
Yeah, now that's going to change, because Sam and I need to do a little housekeeping and maybe check with some of you about how things are done for undergraduates at Yale, just to make sure we have the right time, it doesn't conflict with your exams and so forth. It's not easy for us to get all the logistics. And also, I had originally wanted to give you guys a whole day to come up and deliver it in my lab, but it turns out you guys don't have swipe access to the 3rd floor of Hill House 17. So then we have to have someone sitting literally sitting at a table on the lobby of Hill House 17 to receive the exam. So we can't have someone there 8 hours. You see what I'm saying? It's just we can't have someone 8 hours waiting for exams. So we have to have a narrow window. All these little annoying complications. Other questions about the exam? Yeah.
How much will the eloquency of our argument factor into it, because it is just like 2 papers?
Yeah, so it's important. I mean, I think, if you think about it, guys, if you haven't learned this by now, let me tell you how it works. So think about it from the point of view of someone like me who loves you guys, who wants you to learn and be happy and enjoy your experience, but who also has to evaluate you in some way, assign grades. You have a stack of things to read, and penmanship sometimes counts. Like I try to discipline myself not to, and so that's why it's all typed. And clarity counts. So you want to start with a really good first paragraph, right? Put the professor in the right frame of mind. This person has something clear to say. They're articulating it well. Have a beginning, middle, and an end. Put subheadings. Don't just have 7 pages of prose. Say the first 2 pages have this. You have a subheading, another subheading. Make it easy for your reader. Not just now when you're at Yale and writing stuff for professors, but when you leave Yale and are writing stuff for other people, right? You want clarity of prose, ease of reading. You want to have landmarks for your readers so that they know what they're getting into. These are just basic tips on good writing. And pay attention to the beginning and the end, right? Think about it. Like when you are in a classroom setting, or when you're evaluating someone for a date or for a job opportunity, first impressions make a difference. So it's worth spending some time on it. Did I answer your questions? Yeah. Other points? Yeah.
I'm just curious as to why it's such a lengthy final exam when it wouldn't really be that long if it was an in-class exam.
Say that again. It wouldn't be that long. Well, the obligations for the class are spread out across the midterms and the final. Over the last 8 years, we've experimented with lots of different formats. We used to have an in-class final, but the class got to be a size where it was truly impossible to grade handwritten exams.
Right, so why so lengthy? It's really long final exam.
Well, my sense is the overall burden of the work in this class, 110 pages of reading per week, per session, on average, 2 midterms, and a final is not out of whack, even 15 pages. Like you would have, some of your classes will have weekly problem sets, a midterm, and a final, if you're taking sciences. Or if you're taking a heavy-duty reading class, you'll read a novel a week in English and write a 35-page paper and maybe 2 5-page papers. I mean, those are very typical requirements for a class. I don't know, do people think that maybe the 15 pages is long, maybe plus or minus, but the totality of workload I think is sort of in the sweet spot for this class. I could think about rejiggering it and maybe giving 3 midterms and a shorter final, or having a paper due, or, I mean, maybe we'll change that in the future. But for now, that's sort of where we're at. It used to be 21 pages, by the way, 3 questions. Yeah?
Are quizzes pages with footnotes included, or?
So you really should not, we don't have a policy on that because there really shouldn't be too many footnotes, right? I mean, it's just a reading, so let's say an answer is based on 7 of the readings, or 4 of the readings, or 10 of the readings, you could just put Smith reading or something, you know, just have a little list at the end. It's not a research paper. If you've been keeping up with the reading and you've been paying attention in class, these will not be hard questions for you to answer. They'll require you to think, but there'll not be nothing tricky about them or hard about them. Yeah?
You don't want complete references of paper either.
You can give me complete or not, so long as it's clear that you're referring. We're not going to ding you if you're not on MLA style or social science style, or if some of you use endnotes and some of you use footnotes, we don't care. Yeah?
So by the no collaborating, does that also include like there's like asking your TF question?
Yeah, the TFs will be really not of a mind to help you once we distribute the exam. So I'm not worried about the TFs, but I don't want you talking to your peers, like, you know, how do you think this is? Or, I mean, you can talk about these topics, but you should not be remotely in a situation where you're collaborating in a way that leads to similar prose. Okay? Any other questions on the file? Yes?
Is there a reason like when you find out the questions are on the 24th instead of on the 24th?
My experience is that, well, I can't, you'll see the answer to that question when you see the final. But I would strongly encourage you to come to the last class. Let's just say that. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. So specific exact instructions will be distributed and put on the course website. We'll work out the logistics. Okay, now the merging of humans and machines is alternately described as utopian or dystopian in both fiction and nonfiction. So there's a long history of this. So here's a movie, you know, the brain that wouldn't die. Here is, the evil of Frankenstein. So those of you that have read Victorian novels or have taken class of Victorian fiction, the resurrectionist movement, there was a lot of interest in sort of life or death distinctions. Here's another sort of effort, Born Bored. And on the right is a book called Rebuilt. And the author of this book, and the title is Rebuilt, How Becoming Part Computer Made Me More Human, Michael Chorost, had been severely hearing impaired since birth. And when one morning in 2001, his remaining hearing suddenly and inexplicably completely shut down. And fortunately for Chorost, cochlear implants had progressed to the point where people formerly isolated from everyday sounds could actually now hear rustling leaves, even whispers, as they moved about through the world. A tiny device was surgically implanted behind his left ear. He had a magnetic headpiece that stuck to his head over the implant, and then a wire that was threaded from this device through his cochlea, spiraling through the cochlea, this little tiny wire, and then another wire that went down to a processor in his belt. And Chorost described it, his hearing wasn't restored, it was replaced. His body was now, in his judgment, part machine. And this implant was only the first step of the author's learning to hear again as his brain struggled to interpret the new electrical signals that it was receiving. And there are other gray zones too, not just between people and machines, but between people and animals. This is baby Faye, and in 1984, when I was at Yale, she received a baboon heart that was transplanted into her, from a baboon into her. And she lived for 20 days after this. There was then, as now, a shortage of organs for transplantation. People had been experimenting with xenotransplantation, taking livers from chimpanzees and putting them to humans, hearts from baboons and putting them to humans, with the idea being that if we could find a way to cross a species divide, we would be able now to have a plentiful supply of organs for humans who need them. Unfortunately, this was not to be, and it's actually medically and biologically very almost insuperable, I would say, challenge to do xenotransplantation, and she died after 20 days. In 1922, a pig liver was implanted into a human boy to buy time for a human organ but he died within 32 hours. So this young boy was about to die. They were waiting for an organ for transplantation. They didn't have any, so they tried pig liver him for a while. He died nevertheless. And this is Oscar Pistorius of South Africa, who likes to call himself the fastest man on no legs. And he was born without fibula in his lower legs and other defects in his feet. And he had both his legs amputated below the knee when he was just 11 months old. Now, I've been telling the story about Oscar Pistorius and updating it every year for about 7 years, and as probably most of you know, very sadly right now, he's on trial for murdering his girlfriend, which he almost certainly did. But there's other aspects of his life that interest us here, not his recent history. Pistorius was quoted a few years ago, sort of when he had already begun to compete at elite athletic levels. He said, "I don't see myself as disabled. There is nothing I can't do that able-bodied athletes can do," he said. And in fact, his time in the 400 was faster than, I'm sure, than anyone in this room. He had 46.56 seconds, and he had a second place finish against able-bodied runners at the South African National Championship a few years ago. So here he is, he's called Blade Runner. These are the prostheses he wears when he runs on his blades. Here he is with his blades, and here he is with his more conventional, at that time, prosthetic legs. But the question becomes, do these prosthetic legs simply level the playing field for Pistorius, compensating for his disability, or do they give him some kind of inequitable edge via a kind of techno-doping? And it was unclear initially whether the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, would actually allow him to compete in the Olympics. But many arguments were made in his favor. For example, since 2004, transgender athletes have been allowed to compete in the Olympics. And some noted that athletes already modify themselves in a number of ways, like baseball sluggers who undergo laser eye surgery to improve their vision, or pitchers who have elbow reconstruction using sturdier ligaments from elsewhere in their body, giving them better elbows in some sense. And at least 3 disabled athletes had previously competed in the Summer Games. George Iser, an American, won a gold medal in gymnastics while competing on a wooden leg in the 1904 Games in St. Louis. Neroli Fairhall, a paraplegic from New Zealand, competed in archery in the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. And Marla Runyon, a legally blind runner from the United States, competed in the 1500 meters at the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. So there have been other previous exceptions made for disabled athletes. There had been other kind of rulings regarding transgender athletes. The question was, should Pistorius be allowed to compete in the Olympics against so-called able-bodied runners or not? And this is one of my favorite pictures of him before then. This little girl doesn't also have hands. I don't know if you can see in the image, this cute little girl. So she's lacking wrists and hands in addition to feet, and she's wearing her little blades. And here he is and teaching her to run and move her hands. But as one critic of the Olympic Committee's disinclination to allow Pistorius to compete asked, he said, "Are they looking at not having an unfair advantage, or are they discriminating because of the purity of the Olympics? Because they don't want to see a disabled man line up against an able-bodied man for fear that if the person who doesn't have the perfect body wins, what does that say about the image of man?" Now, whose argument from the readings does this resemble? That concern that the Olympic Committee may have had. Any thoughts from the readings? What would Sandel have had to say to this? So Harris and Sandel are in a big argument in the readings. I didn't give you Sandel to read as well because I thought Harris did a fair job of summarizing Sandel, but Harris had a compelling set of counter-arguments. And Sandel's argument is basically that there is something about the human body that's special, and that deserves some kind of special respect and deference. And Harris doesn't quite buy that argument. And it's illustrated, that argument is illustrated by the case of Pistorius. In May of 2006, the Court of Arbitration for Sport actually ruled in Pistorius' favor, allowing him to compete in the Beijing Games. And part of the evidence in the case had to do with whether the blades gave him some kind of advantage. The blades were called technical aids, and he was allowed to compete, but did not win any medals. In July of 2008, he ran the 400 meters in 46.25 seconds, which was not quite fast enough to meet the South Africa Games, but it was down to 45.2 seconds for the 400 meters before the London Games and in fact, he ran in London. And as I said, unfortunately, his recent history is terrible. Nevertheless, the case of Pistorius and these types of raises the following observation, which is that these types of bodily modifications can erase the lines between the abled and the disabled, raising all kinds of philosophical questions. What should an athlete look like? Where should limits be placed on technology to balance fair play with a right to compete, for example? And in fact, the IOC has also recently taken a stab at defining which athletes count as women. Specifically, a recent ruling excludes females with a, quote, male range of androgen levels from competing. But interestingly, the IOC has given male range females an out. They may opt to medically lower their androgen levels. And some athletes appear to have taken the IOC up on their offer. This is an image of Caster Semenya, a South African track star, who's been receiving some sort of treatment in order to run in the games in London. And here's a quote from a Toronto reporter, quote, either due to criticism or because of the new regulations or some other factors, Semenya no longer qualifies as, quote, breathtakingly butch, according to the Toronto Star's Stephanie Findlay, who now describes her as, quote, feminine. She wears a tight this is not me speaking, she wears a tight turquoise polo over her fit feminine body. Relaxed, poised, and it must be said pretty, the young woman with an irresistible smile is almost unrecognizable from photographs taken during the height of the controversy, she writes. So this is the same person on the left and the right when she presumably made some interventions to lower the, quote, abnormally high levels of natural androgens that were in her body. She wasn't doping with testosterone or anything. She had that naturally, but it was felt to be some kind of unfair advantage, and the IOC said, well, if you take care of that, then you can still compete. And indeed, if you look at this image, you can see that Semenya's face has gotten rounder, her hair longer, her figure curvier, and so forth. And whether fair or unfair, there may be something to the advantage line of argument. Semenya's performance times also look quite different after her estrogen treatment. She won a 2009 race with a time of 1 hour, 55 minutes, and 45 seconds by a 2-second margin. In the past year she began after the treatment, she placed 8th in the race with a time of over 2 hours. So the question, though, is if we buy the IOC's logic, why not go whole hog? I mean, why not test male athletes for abnormally high androgen levels as well, and require them to step back if we're concerned with some distribution and someone at the high end isn't allowed, maybe they shouldn't be having some kind of unfair advantage. Now what's this? Who knows what this is? Anyone familiar with these? Any swimmers here? What? A shark suit. Yeah, it's a shark suit. What else can someone tell me about this? What is this technology? This is a so-called razor suit. These are special swimsuits that were designed by Speedo in the so-called Aqualab, which was its global research and development facility. And they approached NASA's legendary Langley Research Center to conduct research on drag reduction in swimsuits because of the center's long history of using wind tunnel testing on drag reduction for aircraft and boats. And working with NASA aerospace engineer Steve Wilkinson and other U.S. and foreign research organizations, as well as U.S. Olympic swimmers, they developed the laser LZR racer swimsuit, which are shown here in well-known swimmers, both men and women. And when they started to be used in 2008, an astonishing 108 world records in swimming were broken, 79 of them by competitors wearing these swimsuits. These are already elite Olympic athletes, but now they wear this different swimsuit and they're just suddenly breaking records. And opponents call the use of such suits a kind of technological doping. Well, against this backdrop, let's consider the issue of human enhancement, which is the topic for today, its morality and its regulation. And there are difficult questions related to the application of technology to human enhancement in areas as diverse as curing disabilities, health, longevity, intelligence, emotional control, aesthetic expression, spiritual goals, and actually, if you look at it intergenerationally, ways in which we might apply such technology to ensure the best lives for our children. And the questions arise as to why would anyone oppose such enhancements? I mean, if we can apply technology in a way which improves all of those things, how could you object? I mean, what possible rational basis for objection might there be? Would it be better to have shorter lives, more disabilities, less intelligence, less memory, less happiness? It's kind of a hard argument that Harris is engaged in the materials that you were assigned. And the question becomes, what's the difference between a cochlear implant and a bionic ear? What's the difference between restoring lost hearing and giving you enhanced hearing? Or what's the distinction between cosmetic surgery and genetic enhancement? We permit cosmetic surgery. Why not permit genetic enhancement? And we have, in fact, lots of troubling contrasts that are discussed in the reading and that you should be thinking about. So, for example, what's the difference between controlling your diabetes versus diet by using diet versus an internal insulin pump? I can invent a technology, I can implant it in your body, it could detect your sugar, and then pump in insulin and regulate your sugar automatically. What's the difference between that and diet? What is the difference? Any ideas? What difference does that cultivate? What are you thinking?
Well, it takes away the personal agency, and you no longer have to put in that extra effort to get the result.
Yeah, so the diet requires more personal agency and takes it away. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm tempted to say that it's a good thing, but I can see where morally and ethically it would be a bad thing because we expect people to make their own decisions after a certain point.
But what goal are we actually advancing if you tell people it's for your own good that you're doing poorly? It's morally wrong to give you a device that regulates your insulin, but it's morally praiseworthy to require you to diet, be unable to do so, or even if you succeed, to say that's terrific, but deny you a simpler approach to the problem. Yeah, in the back. Yeah, so you can see that there'll be debates about this topic and concerns. Here's another example. What's the difference between SAT score improvement via Kaplan test prep versus Ritalin? Many of you in this audience have probably tried both of those things, alas. But what's the difference between those two? What if you could spend 6 weeks or 12 weeks taking Kaplan every week to take your SATs, or pop a couple Ritalin pills and get the same advantage? Yeah, Rachel.
Well, one, Ritalin probably has some side effects that
Let's stipulate that it does not. The 2 doses of Ritalin is utterly safe. Kaplan has side effects too. You could die being driven to Kaplan. I'm sure a couple of people die every year on their way to Kaplan, so there's life lost in prepping for the SATs.
Okay, my other comment was short right off as well. They showed that Ritalin doesn't actually improve social or test functioning significantly.
I'm not sure that's true what you said. You can send me the papers on that. Yeah, in the back. Let's say that it did improve. Yeah, someone else was going to say something over here? Raise your hand. Someone else comments? Yeah, all right.
Also brings up the question if it's not accessible to everyone.
Yeah. But Ritalin is cheaper. We can give Ritalin to everyone. Just throw it out. Really, a couple doses of Ritalin might be very equalizing. Poor and rich alike can have Ritalin. Would you be in favor of that?
Not necessarily. It goes back to the agency thing with society respects hard work and putting in.
Yeah, but to hell with society. I don't want to work hard. I just want to take a couple of pills. Yeah.
And if the results that you get from taking the SAT while taking the nuance, results you get as a Ritalin wouldn't be your natural abilities. Compared to
Okay, but now I have ADHD and I need the Ritalin to give me to equalize. I'm like Pistorius now, so I'm not have quote normal natural abilities that need Ritalin to enhance them. Are you going to let me have Ritalin if I need it medically because of a deficit?
Yes.
Okay, so then why can't I take it now I don't have a deficit to make me even better?
Where does it stop?
Okay, where does it stop? Slippery slope arguments are always difficult to sustain morally, I think, but it's not a bad argument. I'm not shutting you down, Rachel. I'm sorry. Yes?
Well, there's also a difference between getting someone who has a disability up to the level where everybody else in society is, and then those people who are already on that level trying to enhance them even further. So
Okay, now I understand that it's easy to use words to describe that difference, but to draw the moral distinction is difficult. And actually, even the practical distinction can be hard, and that was what was being discussed in the Pistorius case. Pistorius says these blades are just restoring me to a normal level, and his critics are saying, no, they're an unfair advantage, they're making me better than we are. How would that be discussed? Yes, back.
actually just boils down to social cultural norms. I mean, if we think that riddling is okay, we'll be okay with it, but right now we think it's not.
So you think it's arguments, like social construction argument from the beginning of the class, yeah. I want to keep in mind Araba's point about democratic control, because that's going to be a very important point we'll come back to, yes, in the back.
I think the point of like impairment and whether or not you're thinking it because you're impaired is really important. And like regardless of whether or not that puts you ahead of other people, it's still okay because the reason that you had was that you were impaired.
Yeah, but I'm impaired too. You know, I only have 100 and some odd IQ points, and some of my colleagues have 10 IQ points more than me. And I, you know, if I took Ritalin, I would be like them. So I feel really impaired. I'd like some Ritalin.
It's not feeling impaired, but you're like, so if your doctor tells you like you.
Yes, my doctor will agree with me that I'm impaired. So you know, you can see where I'm going. I'm going to move on. I mean, we could spend the rest of the time, but let me just frame this. So, or here's another example. What's the difference between weight loss via exercise versus plastic surgery or drugs? Or what about examples of musicians using beta blockers to conquer stage fright? Or the Supreme Court case discussed in your readings of a golfer needing a cart. Is the essential part of the sport or the activity crucial? What about corrective myopia surgery? Many of you might have had this type of surgery. Do you have an unfair advantage now compared to your glass-wearing colleagues at Yale? And Sandel provides the illustration of oxygen deprivation during runner's training. And he talks about the difference between living at a high altitude, so you're running in Denver your whole life, and at high altitude there's less oxygen and your body pumps up more. It's like when I used to do karate, our sensei would make us wear heavy weights on our hands and feet, and we would spar with these heavy weights, and then we would take them off and we felt like gods. You know, we would move our hands and feet. Or for those of you that have done athletic training with weights on you, it feels very different when you remove them. And similarly, people that run at high altitude that come to sea level, they feel terrific. They have a high hemoglobin level. It feels to them like they have, and they do have some kind of advantage. What's the difference between naturally being at high altitude versus deliberately depriving yourself of oxygen, like the example of the tents that runners will create special tents with low oxygen levels and sleep in those tents at night, or imitating as if they were at high altitude, versus erythropoietin injections, which is a naturally occurring hormone that will give you more red blood cells, versus having extra EPO genes implanted in you, right? You can imagine a circumstance in which you say, I'd like my children to have an advantage when it comes to running. I'm going to do some genetic engineering in them or in me to give them these advantages. And the question is a good and not an easy question to answer. What's the difference between all of these things? And Harris has the conceit of a school which achieves superhuman outcomes versus a technology that does. And he plays with this difference. What's the difference between a school versus a kind of technology that achieves the same outcome? And Sandel's opening gambit is to ask whether it is wrong to make a deaf child by design, and whether it is wrong to make a tall or smart child by design. And he asks, what's the difference? What's the difference if you say there are many deaf parents who don't want children who can speak, who can hear? They actually affirmatively want a child who's deaf. Would we deny them that opportunity? And conversely, what about other parents who wanted to engineer children who weren't deaf or had superhuman hearing? What's the difference between all of these cases? And in fact, when you can begin to think about these questions in a very nuanced sort of a way. And we typically better ourselves by bettering our environment. But what about literally improving ourselves? So now the question is not changes you can make in your environment, but changes you can make in your own body. What about deliberately intervening in the natural lottery and not just in the social lottery as we've been discussing so far in this class? So up until now, we've taken the natural lottery as a given. People are born with certain talents and traits and abilities, and then what happens? And we've been focusing on the social lottery. But what if actually we could intervene in the natural lottery, engineer different kinds of people, or modify the kinds of bodies that they are born with? And in fact, as we saw last lecture, there are changes we as a species have already been implementing that are changing our genes. Right? We domesticate cattle and have milk, and we have different genes as a result 3,000 years later. What's the difference between that type of change and the kind of more accelerated change where we might engage in genetic engineering as considered in Harris today? So let's look at the effects of some of these technologies. Here are some technologies that might affect the human brain. And you can imagine this looking at brain enhancers as consisting of hardware or software and as being internal or external. And in fact, you could group them more generally. You could group the enhancers more generally in this type of taxonomy. So here, for example, are external hardware. In the olden days, this included things like pictures and writing. And now we have wearable computers and cell phones. And soon, I think we're going to have sort of a wireless exocerebrum, like a kind of prosthetic computer that's attached and interacts with our brain in a way I'll show you in just a moment. Or here's external software, calendars, which have existed for a long time, internet and search, data visualization, expert systems, and biofeedback, which we also use a lot. Or internal software, for example, education. What you're experiencing right now is modifying your brains, right? Or mnemonics, or cognitive therapy, or meditation and concentration. And how is that different than internal hardware? Like, what's different about me giving you software education rather than drugs that make you more able to do things, or gene therapies, or deep brain stimulation, or stem cell interventions, or sensory prosthetics, or different sorts of brain-computer interfaces? And in fact, there are already sensory prosthetics that are being invented. We discussed the cochlear implant a moment ago, which threads this little wire in the cochlea and then has this little external device and then goes down to another technology that's worn around the belt, or now it's being more miniaturized. This man here is a blind man who has wearing glasses with a special kind of TV camera that feeds the signal back into, in principle, into electrodes that are implanted on his occipital cortex to give him some sense of vision, analogous to what might be done with a cochlear implant. Or you could imagine all kinds of brain-computer interfaces where people where there are electrodes that might be inserted into their brains and that might interact with their neurons or otherwise detect neuronal signals that could be used to control all kinds of devices. And here's a video that I'd like to show you of such an example. This is a colleague of mine from when I was at the University of Pennsylvania. This is his story. We'll just watch a couple of minutes of this.
Scott Mackler was a husband, father, and successful neuroscientist when he received perhaps the worst news imaginable. At the age of 40, he could run a marathon in 3.5 hours, but it was about that time that he discovered he had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. His brain was losing its connection to virtually every muscle in his body. The near total paralysis would also stop his lungs. He didn't want to live on a ventilator, so 9 years ago, he recorded this message for his 2 sons.
I know the future holds lots of love and joy and pride, and that life goes on, and I'll be watching you along the way. And I love you very much, and I'll see you.
This is Scott Mackler today. His mind is sharp as ever, but his body has failed. Doctors call it locked-in syndrome. Scott and his wife Lynn learned to communicate with about the only thing he has left, eye movement.
He'll look at you for yes,
right,
and for no.
And for no, he looks away. I see. It's cumbersome.
It is.
But recently, Scott found a new voice.
Can everyone hear the PC? I apologize for the quality of the voice.
Scott wrote these words one letter at a time with nothing but his thoughts and the help of what's called a brain-computer interface, or BCI. He wears a cap that picks up the electrical activity of his brain and allows him to select letters simply by thinking about them. Then the computer turns his sentences into speech.
I hate being helpless, and when other people put words in my mouth.
Well, this is a very unusual interview for 60 Minutes. We've done something that we never, ever do, and that is we submitted the questions in advance because it takes Scott a little while to put the answers together using the BCI device. Scott, I understand that earlier in the progression of this disease, you said that at the point you had to go on a ventilator, you didn't want to go on anymore. But today you are on a ventilator, and I'm curious about what changed your mind.
Because I can still communicate.
It isn't fast. It takes 20 seconds or so to select each letter. Scott told us it took him about an hour to write the answers to our 16 questions. But he writes well enough to continue his research and manage his lab at the University of Pennsylvania, where he still goes to work every day.
You use this system even to text your sons, for example. And I wonder what it would mean to your life.
So he's still running his lab as an MD PhD at the University of Pennsylvania with this technology. He's an amazing man. But it's also an amazing technology that this provides. And you guys are living in the era of this kind of a technology. So the question though is, what is what we've been talking about a utopian or dystopian vision of the future? And here's some slides that summarize part of what some people foresee as a logical conclusion of this technology. So Harris says, this is great. We can take this technology, we can do so much more with it than merely allowing Professor Mackler, to continue to run his lab. And so they foresee the people that are worried about this, or not just that are worried about it, the people that are excited about this, they foresee the existence of commercial entities that provide modifications of our genes and bodies, such as the fictitious company Human Upgrade, shown here. So this is an example of what Human Upgrade might offer. It might offer victory. And the text from this ad says, to lose, yes, I remember, that was before. To win, I'm quoting from the ad, that is what forces humans to go to the edge. There is no better feeling than to conquer your enemies, to be the best, to be the master. Be what evolution did not let you be, and make the step which leads further than ever before. For those for whom the thrones were made, is the ad copy on this. And this technology contains an element of comparison. One upgrades to improve one's relative standing, which was one of Sandel's objections to which Harris was responding, and one of sociologist and transhumanist philosopher Jay Hughes' concerns. What if only the rich can upgrade? What if this technology is only available to certain members of our society? Here's one example, a human upgrade. You could have a sixth finger, for example. Now, those of you, I used to stick fight, those of you that do stick fighting, it's really helpful to have a sixth finger if you count them here, if you look carefully. It would enhance your ability to do that. Or, what about if you're a swimmer and you want webbed hands? Why should we prohibit you from having this type of a webbing that might enhance your performance in some way? Or what about this? It's so annoying when little gritty particles get caught between your teeth. Why not just have a simple tooth? One solid tooth that really functioned really effectively. Or what about this? You don't really want that extra septum in your nose. You want some other kind of an appearance. Why, would we or would we not allow people to do these things to themselves, or to their children, or to our society? And the question is, why do these images from Human Upgrade feel different than the prior taxonomy, or the images of Pistorius? Or should they feel different? Should these images be in any way different than Pistorius? Yeah, Rachel.
I think they feel different because we've been trained to look at them differently. Like, I think small children would look at those two things exactly the same way, but as children are parents will listen, that's okay, that's normal.
Yeah. And in a way, I think that's what's wrong with Sandel's argument. I struggle with this argument between Harris and Sandel. But basically, if you think about it, Sandel, even though he's very smart, his argument at the end boils down to that's yucky. Like, really all he's saying is that I'm repulsed by this idea. There's not actually a very powerful argument. It's hard to make a very powerful argument against it. Because, of course, the kinds of things we take for granted now might have been seen by 100 years ago as unacceptable. Yeah.
There's still somewhat of a distinction between things that we can put, or at least we societally can put a linear measurement stick on, and things that we can't. So something like intelligence, I think our earlier example of the SAT, is it okay to improve our SAT results? What that shows is that the SAT is not a good measure, right? If you can game it in this linear way, when intelligence is obviously not linear, then it's not okay to have, the SAT just clearly isn't measuring what we want it to measure. So I think for something like this, where there's no good linear understanding of this is better than that, right? As opposed to something like, we would want everyone to be resistant to HIV, right? That seems like a legitimate thing because we have a very linear measurement of being resistant to HIV.
We would want everyone to be smart, or to get great SAT scores?
Well, we don't know what's smart, we don't know a linear measurement of what smart is, right?
What if we did? What you're complaining, you're concerned.
We don't.
We can never have. There's no.
We can never have that, right? Whereas we.
Really? You think that?
Yes, absolutely.
Have you ever met anyone smarter than you?
I'm not in every way. I'm not saying I'm the smartest person.
No, I get it. No, I get it. I wasn't setting you up. Okay, I often meet people that are smarter than me, and some of them in every way, and it's annoying, and I can tell. I think I would beg to differ with you on the predicate of your argument. Now, your argument itself, I'm not sure I would agree with, but I think even the predicate I would agree with. I think there is a way to construct some kind of scale to put a valence on it. Yeah, smart, smarter, smartest, So I think there is a way. Or musical, like I'm completely unmusical, and I'm reminded of this all the time. And then, I think there's a scale of this. Yes, Hannah.
These are also just like these are constantly like keen everything about you. Would these people also change themselves in like not great ways or without like having studied and stuff, they also find that from doing that?
Yeah, they will change, but that comports with our vision of autonomy. I mean, how can I prevent you from what you do to your body? What interest does the state have? You're not a child. Now, with minors, it's totally different. Like we discussed earlier in the course, the state has a compelling interest in preventing parents from abusing their children or preventing them from getting medical care, blah, blah, blah. But you're an adult. Why should I have any interest in preventing you from doing what you want? Yeah. What if you were an able-bodied runner and you said, that Pistorius guy, he's pretty fast. I want some of those blades too. Cut off my legs and put on blades. Yeah.
That comment kind of downgrades my argument, but I was just going to say that, one of the main distinctions between this and like some like off-road stories is that these people have a choice, and he didn't. Like he didn't have a choice to have to use those blades, whereas like these people are.
Okay, so that's a very subtle and important point you're making. Okay, the element of agency there, whether they have a choice or not. Now, in principle, people who are born without hearing have a choice as well. They don't have to have a cochlear implant. But that distinction is also very important. This is the democratic one. Is that Saad?
Daniel said.
Daniel.
Yes. You said that the state, like, what interest does the state have in preventing disability? I agree that the state has an interest necessarily. But would the state be required to force physicians, for example, or surgeons, to do surgeries that would alter people in this way?
Yeah, so that's an engineering problem. It depends on whether I thought you were going to ask, would the state be obliged to pay for it? And then that raises what I consider to be the thorniest and most difficult aspect of this thing, which is the potential inequality and the democratic control. So, what if only certain segments of society, we would create a sort of a subgroup of demigods who, could perfect their children, and their children would perfect their children, and so forth.
Well,
and there the state might have an interest in regulating that. But I don't think the state would have an interest in preventing or requiring physicians to do anything. I think if we had that point of view, we'd just allow people, the market, to sort that out.
That's actually my second question is, what do you say to Sandel's point about the inequitable distribution of resources?
Yeah, so I am concerned about that, but there's an answer to that question. I don't think that's a moral objection. So that's a pragmatic objection. So Sandel says, we're going to get inequality as a result of this. I would say, yes, we should be concerned about inequality. What policies can we put in place to prevent inequality? Or we might say, look, this is so frightening, we're just not going to allow it. Some people say this, incidentally, about things like sickle cell anemia or organ transplantation. Some people say it's God's intention that you die. Why should we, why should we give you an organ transplant? That's unfair, unequal, whatever. So what's the difference between that? Like, why are we willing to apply this technology and address an inequality when it's sort of below the bar, but not also when it's above the bar? Let me go on and we'll come back. Because some such transformations are not so far-fetched, even given present technology, and these are two unfortunately popular individuals on the internet, Lizard Man on the right and Cat Man on the right. I think the man on the right recently died, actually, who have gone through elaborate modifications to their teeth, to their tattooing, to their bodies, to resemble the kind of totemic animals that they have in mind. And here's a case that was just in the news this past week. I don't know if you saw it. This is the case of a tissue-engineered vagina. I don't know if you saw this case. This was just published in The Lancet. The scientists assessed the use of engineered vaginal organs in 4 patients who were aged 13 to 18 who were born with Meyer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, which is vaginal aplasia. So these girls had normal external genitalia, but no vagina, sometimes no uterus, typically no uterus either. And what they did is they obtained a vulvar biopsy from every girl, and then they cultured and expanded and seeded an epithelium of muscle cells and epithelial cells on biodegradable scaffolds. So they made these biodegradable scaffolds, they put some epithelial tissue, some smooth muscle tissue, and so forth, and cultured it in an incubator, and then coiled it into a tube around, as shown here, that's being sutured up. And then these were implanted into the girls using a perineal approach into these young women. And then they followed them for up to 8 years afterwards. And they did yearly biopsies, showed that the tissue could continue to maintain its physiologically normal, structurally normal tri-layered structure, consisting of an epithelial-lined cell lumen surrounded by a matrix and then muscle. MRIs demonstrated that the engineered organs were fine afterwards. And they also did yearly pelvic exams on these women, and they were fine from that point of view. And they administered a validated, self-administered female sexual function index, which showed that variables were all in the normal range in desire, arousal, lubrication, orgasm, satisfaction, and painless intercourse. So, what could possibly be wrong with this technology? Clearly nothing, in my judgment. But you can see where this type of technology can lead, because eventually we might have extracorporeal uteri that allow women who have no uterus to have a baby that they bear that is their own outside their uterus. And as soon as that technology is available, maybe other people would say, you know, I have a normal uterus, but I'd like to use that extracorporeal uterus because I don't want to bear a child. Or maybe I have some special risks of delivering a baby. And why would we then, what interest could we have in preventing that extension of that kind of technology? Now, I'm framing this conversation so far as in an interrogatory way, not so much because I'm advocating one point of view or another, but because I struggle with this issue, and I don't think it's so easy to stand in the path of this progress. I actually don't think it's easy to construct an argument against it. I'm not saying no argument could or should be constructed against it. I'm just saying it's not so easy in my judgment. And I think that Sandel's arguments, in my eye, aren't sufficiently robust. Because, of course, some of these changes can also occur naturally. This was in January 2009, baby Kamani Hubbard was born in Daly City, California, with 6 fully formed and functional fingers and toes on his hands and his feet. This is known as polydactyly, and it's not an uncommon genetic trait, but in this case it was especially remarkable because all 6 of his digits on his hands and toes, if you look at the photographs and on the x-rays, were fully formed and functional. Usually they're little stubs, little tiny extra protuberances, which are typically removed surgically because they look as a cosmetic problem. It just looks ugly, it has this little thing on the edge of your finger. And his dad, Chris Hubbard, who was a 34-year-old postal worker, noticed a spectacularly rare case at birth. 6 perfect fingers on each hand and 6 perfect toes on each foot, which went well beyond the general trait that ran in his family. Some family members had 6 fingers, not completely developed, but no one had ever had 6 toes. And in fact, Chris Hubbard himself had nubs of 6 fingers removed as a child, as these non-functioning digits routinely are. But now imagine what kind of a piano player, let alone stick fighter, little Kamani Hubbard might grow up to be. I mean, think about that. If you were Kamani Hubbard's parents, would you remove his extra fingers? And what would be the reason you did that? And if you did remove them, would you say, well, maybe I shouldn't be the decider of whether they're removed. Maybe he should grow up and decide himself when he's 18 whether he wants his fingers removed. Because they might come in really handy. He might have some abilities that the rest of us don't have. And then should the IOC let him compete? You know, he would be really good at karate. You know, does he have an unfair advantage? Should he get the equivalent of the androgen treatment, the estrogen treatment that was given to Samanya that I discussed at the beginning? So, not so easy in my judgment. And if Kamani gets to keep his extra fingers, why couldn't we engineer people who had extra fingers? What would be wrong with that if it's so great to have 6 and not 5 digits? And there's actually a social and intellectual movement in favor of embracing these technologies known as transhumanism. And it's an intellectual and cultural movement and a set of ideas that affirms the possibility and, in fact, from their perspective, the desirability of transcending the limitations of the human body through applied reason, especially by using technology to eliminate aging and enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. And transhumanists see themselves as humanists who emphasize what we have the potential to become through reason and technology. Yet, all of these technologies, as Jay Hughes argues in his wonderful book, Citizen Cyborg, which I didn't assign, but which also addresses many of the questions we've been discussing today, these technologies raise important political questions, best resolved in Hughes' estimation and in mine, by a democratic process, where we vote, in fact, on what should and shouldn't be allowed, what should and shouldn't be paid for. And he predicts that this will create all kinds of new coalitions, new political coalitions, these technologies. So the kind of classic right-left distinction might begin to break down as you have disability rights advocates that are advocating against some of these things. Other disability rights advocates are advocating for some of these technologies. Or you have different breakdown in green movements and right, left-wing political ideologies, which might coalesce in different sorts of ways. And the movement is partly based on the argument that human traits have no clear beginning, evolutionarily speaking, and therefore may have no clear end. And in fact, work that many groups around the country, including people at Yale, have been doing, show that apes exhibit almost all the alleged capacities of human nature. They have self-awareness, they have language, they have morality, they have empathy, and they have tool use. And so, if there's no clear distinction between us and animals, what distinctions might we draw, let's say, above us, and if we merge with machines or deploy other technologies? And the emergence of new technologies has always and will always raise problems by blurring boundaries between deeply felt cultural categories like these. Part of the reason that the thing that Sandel is onto, which I have a lot of sympathy for, is there's something creepy about this. It's hard to put your finger on it. It's not hard to say that it's creepy, or even describe why it's creepy, but it's hard, I think, to make the next step from it's creepy and therefore should be prohibited. That's the step that's very hard to make. So there are all kinds of boundary conditions between animals and humans, between humans and machines, between the living and the dead, between natural and artificial, between women and men, and between young and old, that are blurred by the application of some of these technologies. But this technology, as Harris argues and shows, has the prospect for substantially affecting our bodies, our health, and our society. And whether we want to embrace the technology or not, given its inevitability, regardless of whether we want to embrace it or not, I think that given its inevitability, we need to find ways to decide what to do. Because I don't think we can stop. And this then begs the question of whether there might be a fifth phase of the health transition that we discussed at the second lecture of the class. So remember we talked about the three classic phases and then the fourth phase that we're in now. Maybe 200 years from now, people will look at this next phase and think, this was the epoch, the century, when people stepped from living a maximum of 100 or 120 years to living 200 years. This was the phase in which technology was used to master mortality. People began to replace body parts willy-nilly. And the only limit on your survival was whether you had an exogenous killer, like we discussed a few weeks ago, something outside your body that kills you, or the decay of your brain. Other than that, your whole body became replaceable because of technological advances. Body part by body part. In your lifetimes, we'll have artificial kidneys. We already have artificial bladders, artificial vaginas, stem cell technology, 3D printing technology. These things are going to happen. And then we'll have external body parts and replanting them. Initially, they'll be used on people who are born without these or who fail at young age, but eventually old people who otherwise would die will start having these body parts and have life extension. Or eventually people will say, actually my kidneys work pretty good, they're within the normal range, but I want even better kidneys. Or I want a better heart, and it's so great the technology now, I don't run a risk of dying, let me have it. So these are the kinds of debates we surely have, and it begs the question of whether we will have this fifth phase of the health transition. So here's the argument that in essence, if the goal is okay, living longer, having better health, do the means justify it? And basically Sandel is a deontologist and Harris is a utilitarian. And deontology, as most of you probably have read about or heard about, is the idea that the moral worth of an action depends on the rightness or wrongness of the actions themselves, and not on the rightness or wrongness of the consequences of those actions. Deontology privileges the duty or obligation inherent in certain courses of action. Utilitarians say that's all rubbish. We're just interested in what happens. And utilitarianism is the idea that the moral worth of an action is solely determined by its contribution to the overall utility in maximizing happiness or pleasure as summed among all persons. It is a form of consequentialism. The moral worth of an action is determined by its outcomes, and the ends justify the means. So in essence, actually, I think what's happening here is that Sandel's major objections is that genetic enhancement represents a triumph of will over giftedness. He seems to prefer fate over choice, and he seems to think that there is something intrinsically moral about that which is natural. He suggests that designed children are somehow less fully free, though he acknowledges limitations to his argument. And he raises the specter of eugenics to argue against genetic engineering, without adequately exploring the similarities and differences between the two, between eugenics and genetic engineering, in my judgment. Harris, on the other hand, says that there's actually a positive moral duty to enhance, and he's okay with the idea of us ceasing to be human as we now understand the term. His is a greater good argument. So here are questions we might ask. What is the difference between using the technologies to cure disease or acquire superhuman powers? Why is self-modification through self-control different from self-modification through technology? I know why it's descriptively different, but is it morally different? That's a harder argument to sustain. Why should things that lie between be morally problematic? Why is it morally problematic to be between a man and a woman, if at all? Why is it morally problematic to be between life and death, or between human and machine, between animal and human? What's weird about that kind of transition or that kind of state? And do technology and democracy go together, and why should they? So part of this has to do with Americans' aversion to reward without merit and to effortless reward. And as Sandel says, natural gifts and the admiration they inspire embarrass the meritocratic faith. They cast doubt in the conviction that praise or rewards flow from effort alone. Still, Sandel admires natural gifts because they are natural and because they somehow have some kind of intrinsic dignity. But I'm not sure he's right. I think Harris is probably right. And democracy, J. Hughes argues in his book Citizen Cyborg, is needed to control these technologies. And in fact, in some ways, democracy and science and technology together have been the principal sources of the rise in human welfare over the last 400 years, and maybe over the coming 400 as well. Any questions? Yeah.
So I was kind of struggling with what you were saying earlier about like there kind of being these absolute standards of like smartness, blah blah blah, and things that we have from your interaction boards. And like I felt like that was a bit in tension with some of the things we talked about earlier, like when we were on the neuro and mobility unit, where kind of like there are like different nuanced differences in people that we might not understand privilege us and get privileging us later. So I don't know. It just seems weird that like I'm just wondering how we can like establish like the good norm that we're all going towards.
No, I'm not saying that. If I've understood your question, and then I'll let you guys go in just a second. I'm not saying that. But I don't think that the things are black and white. Like, even the example that Amelia put on the table, intelligence is continuous versus HIV resistance is not. There could be gradations of HIV resistance. And maybe there are trade-offs. If you're more HIV resistant, your immune cells function poorly in some other way. I don't think things are necessarily dichotomous. Nor do I think we know where we're going. I mean, I don't think that we're just going to take a step forward and then stop. We're going to continue to take a step forward with this technology. So I don't want you leaving the lecture today thinking I have a strong position on this. I am kind of two minds, but I just don't find Sandel compelling. I don't necessarily disagree with him, and I find Harris much more persuasive in his arguments. Anyway, see you next time.